Hi Ram.
Hi Ka, எப்படி இருக்கே?
Good. If you can call this situation good, but anyway, there are both sides.
Yeah.
And I think it's so much of uncertainty, and some bit of anxiety. Or Mari or state of limbo irukku.
Yeah, I know.
But at the same time, changed perspectives, lot of housework, of course. Lot of
Yeah.
time to think about music.
Yeah, exactly. That's the good thing about this.
And time to connect with friends and colleagues in the industry like we are doing now, which we never do normally, right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So how have you been?
I'm okay. Pretty much the same what you described. It's pretty much the
Yeah.
same for everybody, I guess. I guess we just have to thank our stars that we get to be in without much problem and
Yes.
so many people struggling for even the most basic things. So
Yeah.
we should really be thankful.
Absolutely. And also
But
that we
yeah.
have something like music to keep us
Exactly.
on track.
It's still during this, even when there's actually nothing going on, still there is some sort of purpose with what we do,
Yes. Yes.
So
some sort of
that
system, some sort of discipline, some sort of practice.
yes,
Some method to the madness.
Yes, அது இல்லைன்னா ரொம்ப கஷ்டம். I mean, if you don't have any purpose, then it's very, very tough. So
Yes.
lucky for that. Anyway.
Yeah. So Ram, I was thinking, you and I have spoken about so many things in the years that we've known each other.
Yeah.
And just recently I was listening to some couple of excerpts of one of my favorite ragams, Hameer Kalyani.
Yeah,
which I think is also one of your favorite ragas.
Both
right?
of us, yes.
And I was reminded of the time you actually sang it so beautifully at my place. You sang Manamuleda, right?
Oh, yeah, Manamuleda.
Yeah.
But that was.
But what really struck me
experience.
is that, ours is such a dynamic form, Carnatic music, right? There's been so much of change over the years, over the decades and centuries.
Yeah.
And it's such a kind of a dynamic thing where change is constantly happening.
Yeah.
Ragas are evolving, our performance styles, performing settings,
Yes.
instruments, or, even the musician's own perception of his or her own art.
Yeah.
It's just constantly changing, and not to mention compositions themselves.
Yeah.
Right? And so many variations within the same composition, so many interpretations. Even within the so-called traditional styles or thoughts of music that we have.
Yeah.
So, this brings up this question in my mind always about whether traditions are really set in stone. Are they? Should they be? Are they not? If yes or no, to what extent? We are always grappling with these as students or performers, right? You know that.
Yeah. It's ever evolving. That's kind of the paradox of the whole concept of tradition itself.
Yes.
It's because tradition is, we think that it's something that's passed down from generation to generation, which lasts and which is the same thing. But actually, what is being passed down from generation to generation is a very much a living concept that keeps changing from generation to generation based on the sensibilities and aesthetics, I guess, which I guess
because it's a human transmission. I think there's that human quotient that comes in at every stage of that transmission.
Yes.
And leaves room, leaves it open to interpretation, change, all kinds of things. And
exactly.
So many reasons, right, why the change could have happened. Of course, ours is a system where knowledge has always been passed down orally. We've not really gone into the documented process at all. So
it's just the most unfortunate thing because even if we had a written documentation that was very very reliable, I mean, tradition would have still changed, but at least we would have a record of what has been there before and how it has changed.
Yes.
And now we are kind of
most musicians always have this curiosity about how, especially when we are looking at compositions which are more than 200 years old, Trinity compositions and all that. I'm always curious to know how Tyagaraja or Shama Shastri would have actually composed it, right? We have no way of knowing.
But that's the $1 million question. Yeah.
Yes. And of course, sometimes incomplete versions are handed down. Sometimes a very particularly inspired musician adds a touch or two or a chittaswaram or anything.
Yeah.
But I just feel that many of these deviations are also a natural transmission change or transmission loss rather than deliberate instances. You know what
Also,
I mean?
yes, for sure. And I also think that these changes that come about also have to do with the situation in which people are in when they're actually grappling with what has been handed down to them.
Yes.
For example, I think we can say that we don't know how prevalent concert music as such was.
That's also
was
true,
when,
yes.
when the Trinity were living in Tanjavur district. But and we have some sort of a documentation of Muthuswami Dikshita's kritis because of Subbaraya Dikshita and his Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini. And we've heard that Mahavaidyanatha Iyer used to render Vata Abhiganaptim with those 8 to 10 sangatis in his concerts. So by his time, which is about 2 generations removed from Tyagaraja Swami and Muthuswami Dikshita, he as a concert musician, obviously, I guess the definition of being a concert musician is that you have 2 stakeholders involved, the performers and the audience. And maybe he saw that the audience required some pizzazz to do the composition.
Yes.
And he added his 8 very beautiful sangatis, 8 to 10, depending on who you ask or who you hear perform the composition. And that has been passed down to almost everybody who has followed Mahavaidyanatha. I mean, everybody sings those same sangatis, no matter which style of music you belong to. Everybody sings those sangatis, so much so that the majority of the population is not even aware that what we know as the original form of Athapiganaptim is actually, sangati-less, so to speak.
Yes. Which now if we were to hear that same Vatapi, the original, so-called, you wouldn't even relate to it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It is
I recently heard a Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini version of Vatapi, and I just couldn't relate to the structure that we know it. It was interesting from a technical point of view, but musically it was so different.
I would even go one step further and say that it's actually very beautiful, but I mean, part of the beautifulness is because we are so conditioned to hearing something else.
Yes.
That what is actually the oldest version we have with us today actually sounds very new.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And rather than hearing like a melody we are so used to hearing and so comfortably hearing.
Yes.
It is something எப்படி சொல்றது, like பிரமிப்பா இருக்கு.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So.
And also I think that composers that we've had in the recent past or recent memory, like Papanasam Shivan or even Mysore Vasudevachar, these are composers. I don't think many musicians would tamper with their songs because we have at least some amount of documentation.
We do. But the funny thing is, we do actually see very different versions of some compositions. Like Papanasam Shivan, I recently learned Kriti, and I was surprised to find so many different versions of it. Not just the nuances, even like the placement of the words and the development of the sangatis found it quite different from what I was trying to learn. So,
these are all very interesting things. And I remember you once mentioning there's this implied question also, of course, of whether the Guru Shishya transmission has the ability to maintain the exact structure, right? Because I remember you once mentioning about the Tirupavais and how KVN actually notated when Ariyakudi taught it to him, right? Taught the Tirupavais to him. So you want to talk about that? So that was very interesting.
Yeah. So as we all know, Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar tuned the Tirupavai verses in 30 ragas for the 30 verses. And this was told to me by a very well-known musician who's also a very good friend of mine. He told me that K.V. Narayana Swamy was actually the scribe when Ramanuja Iyengar was putting the tunes for these songs. And if you hear the both of them sing, there are quite a few differences. Since we have recordings of both of them singing, there are quite a few differences between the way that they both sing it. Though one was the creator and the other was the scribe.
Yes.
So obviously this tells us that, and also the time period in which they sang it was also quite a bit of years between them, at least 20-30 years between them, right? So in that time, of course, Ramanuja Iyengar had passed on, and KVN sir was left to hone these on his own, by singing them, and you can say that some of the changes must have been because of his own musical sensibilities. And some of them might have been even changes that he would not even have thought about because of just repeated singing and singing and singing. Some changes just naturally and organically came about that we now come to accept as, KVN's version.
Yes.
And when you look at them, directly without the lens of what has transpired in between the passage of time, you have this and you have that. And it looks very, very different when you just compare the two.
Yes. Yeah. So all of this brings me to some questions, which is, should all of these variations or different interpretations be allowed to coexist, left to individual musicians or their audiences to decide what they want to hear or not? Or should any effort be made to retain, as far as possible, the original authentic versions and musicians be persuaded to sing those? What is that? There is a thin line between what is to be followed, what is not to be followed. Who decides what can be safely changed or discarded?
Who decides is actually not too hard of a question, because the person who decides is obviously the person that's performing, right?
Yeah, well, these are all the things that are the grey areas. What can be changed, what can be discarded. What are the criteria that go into all these things?
Yes.
And I think I also feel somewhere that, this multiplicity of traditions that we have, of interpretations, is what makes our music so rich.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so varied. Until there is no mischief or no intentional mischief or mediocrity or those kinds of things. Again, very subjective
exactly.
topics.
Exactly.
So there is no conclusive answer, I feel, except that, you have to be very sensitive. You have to be very, of course, your knowledge, the musician's knowledge of music should be very deep, should be very internalized. So many things go into all these things. And which brings me to the topic of aesthetic.
Yeah.
Right? So what would you say on that subject?
I find it easier to discuss aesthetics as an adjective rather than a noun, because of its as you said, very subjective nature. So someone's aesthetic sense, right, which is more comfortable to deal with that rather than like the aesthetic of Carnatic music.
Yeah.
Because that becomes then. It's almost like set in stone, but the fact is that it's really not set in stone.
You can't set it in stone. That's the whole point.
Yeah, because it's defined by a certain person's sensibilities.
Yes.
And those sensibilities are governed by what he or she has. To put it even more broadly, it's governed by his or her own experiences dealing with the art form that in which we are talking, which aesthetics we are talking about. So in the context of Carnatic music, it would be what he or she has learned from his or her guru.
Yes.
Right. One, it would be what he or she has heard in her lifetime, and during conversations, what they talk about, how people influence his or her views on how music should be presented. These are all the things that once they start, performing on whatever medium that he or she performs.
Yes.
All of that goes into it, and that is what comprises of that person's aesthetic sense.
Yes.
Right. So.
And I feel that all these variations we are talking about, right?
Yeah.
Which become part of one style, are also based on this aesthetic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So to me. It seems to me that by listening to who we all venerate as the great masters of Carnatic music, despite the various styles, which are actually very, very different on their own, there seems to be a general aesthetic, a general form of expression of music that seems to be common
To all the styles.
To all
Or
of them.
to
all of them.
Yes.
Right? Of course, we do have a few exceptions, and they are very, very beautiful in their own way. But in general, we can say that this is what we identify with as the Carnatic aesthetic.
Yes.
And this has been passed on from a very rich tradition of, I guess, Guru Parampara, or like you said, the oral tradition of music.
Yes.
But it's also surprising in one way, because if we look at the original notations of kritis and other compositions that we have with us, and we try to sing them literally as they are presented, we, with our ears tuned to what they are already tuned to, it is impossible to accept some of those today. It's just impossible. We can't accept this as something that could be beautiful. It sounds like archaic almost to us.
Yes.
So what I mean to say by all of this is that what determines what we finally give as our output is really determined only by our own discretion.
So Ram,
Yes.
why don't we now demonstrate with some actual audio excerpts of all the musicians that we've heard sing Venkata Shaila Vihara.
Yes.
Beautiful composition, of course, our favorite in Hameer Kalyani.
Yeah.
And why particularly Hameer Kalyani, I also feel, is because it is a North Indian import.
Yeah.
Right? And
so that itself is a changed tradition.
Yes, that itself is the first major change.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in this process of making it Carnatic, so many interesting changes have happened.
Yeah.
And that's what we can see very obviously in a ragam and a composition like this. So why don't you go ahead and share some of those clips?
So, in the modern era of Carnatic music, it's generally thought that everything starts with Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar. So we shall do the same and start with his rendition of Venkata Shaila Vihara.
Yes.
Shaila Vihara, Venkata Shaila Vihara, Venkata Shaila Vihara.
Okay, and so we can presume by what we know of Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar's life that presumably he acquired this composition because of his, he was greatly inspired by the great Veena Dhanammal. So we can, safely presume that his rendition of, whether he learned it or not from them directly, we can presume that his we don't know, he was greatly influenced by Dhanammal, and obviously that would have reflected in his rendition of this composition.
Okay.
Likewise, we can also somewhat safely assume that the great K.V. Narayana Swamy could have learned this composition from his guru, Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar. And we also know that he was greatly influenced by Sri T. Vishwanathan and T. Raganathan and T. Shankaran, who were descendants of the Dhanammal family, grandsons of Veena Dhanammal herself.
Yes.
So let's listen to him singing the Pallavi of this composition.
Venkata Shaila Vihara Shri Venkata Shaila Vihara Shri Venkata Shaila Vihara
Yeah, so we see an obvious transmission in terms of structure.
Wait. So before we say anything different, I just want to note that though, like you said, the two renditions are so vastly different, I mean, both my face and your face kind of react the same way when we hear both. It's just involuntary smiles.
Yes.
So obviously there's something that there's some common sense of beauty that both renditions have.
Yes.
And it
absolutely.
evokes some kind of beautiful emotional response in the listener.
Absolutely, yes.
So now we can talk about how they're different.
No, what I was trying to say is that from teacher to student, we can see a somewhat natural transmission of the structure of the song. But
Yeah.
it's so vastly different, right, in terms of the feel that we find when we hear it, the way in which it has been rendered, the speed, the glides,
Yeah.
the gamakams, the sangatis, although they are the same somewhat structurally,
Yeah.
the feel when it gets to us is so different, right?
Yes.
So you can see Kavian's own interpretation and his own style creeping into the way he handles
Yes.
the same song,
Yes.
which I presume he would have learned from Ariyakudi, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can only guess so. Though he did have
Yes.
other gurus, we can even say that he could have picked it up from Papa Venkata Iyer,
Yes,
who
also.
was a leading violinist of that
Yes.
period, and who was also heavily influenced by Veena Danamar.
Yes, and also a mentor of Kavian in many ways, right?
Yes. He says that Papa Venkata Iyer was my second guru. Right?
Okay.
Or
Yes.
third guru,
Yeah.
depending how you...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, just like Ramanuja was influenced by Dhanammal, right? Kavian was heavily influenced by T. Vishwanathan.
Yes, of course.
And the other grandsons of that family. So,
Yes.
even in that tradition from Dhanammal to T. Vishwanathan and the rest of them, there's a transmission there which underwent that separate change as it was passed
Absolutely.
down.
In fact,
and
there's
we'll
a
see
very
that.
interesting video interview of T. Vishwa, where he says, did Jaima sing like Dhanammal? No. Did Bala sing like Dhanammal? No. Did Vrindama sing like Dhanammal? No. Do I sing like any of them? No.
No.
But we are all in the same family.
Yes.
And there is this sense of the Dhanammal Bani that's very strongly alive in each one of us.
Yes.
But how each one of us interprets is so different.
Yeah. So that's where the personal element comes in, right? Like, despite who you are influenced by, you have a certain character about you. You have a certain way you think about music, and you have a certain way in which whatever you think projects when you perform music on whichever medium you perform. Like Vishwa's medium would be the flute and vocal.
Yes.
Kavian sir would be his voice. So it manifests.
And also the fact that Vishwa also sang a lot for Balama, right? So
Yes.
he has always spoken about how his musicality was so influenced by her dance.
Yes.
And her
Naturally.
own interpretative music for that dance.
Yes.
So yes, so many things come into play.
Yeah.
So who are you playing next?
So I thought another interesting comparison would be between Ramnad Krishnan and Semmangudi Srinivasa Iyer,
Oh yes.
who were both influenced by Srimati T. Brinda,
Absolutely. Yes.
another descendant of the Thanamal family,
Yes.
right? And it's we can presume that both of them probably picked that composition up from her.
Yes.
Right? Or if not, like I said with Iyengar,
Yeah, even if not, I'm sure
heavily
they influenced somewhat.
heavily influenced by them.
Yes.
So, shall we listen to the Pallavi by them?
Yes.
So that is Ramnad Krishnan, and let's hear Semmangudi Srinivasa Iyer. So
Do you also have the section which from the Charanam?
yeah,
Because I have seen so many differences in the way that particular line, the Mani Mandapa line,
Oh yes.
is sung.
So shall we play again Ramnad Krishnan and Semmangudi?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, you could probably play Semmangudi and
Sorry.
yeah. I think that's a good choice. Yes.
Okay, let's start with Semmangudi's.
Yes.
So that's Semmangudi, and this is Ramnad Krishnan.
So let us now listen to two more clips
Yeah.
from what can arguably be the closest to the original version of the song, considering that Dhanamal's grandmother learned from Subbaraya Shasthri herself.
Yes.
I mean himself, as she learned directly from him. So one can, and it has been said that the repertoire of the Subbaraya Shasthri compositions and even Shama Shastri's compositions in the Dhanammal family was pretty authentic.
In fact, I have heard it said that beyond a few compositions that were popularly known by everybody, like say maybe O Jagadamba or so in Ananda Bhairavi, most of the actual repertoire of Shama Shastri and Subbaraya Shastri were actually only with that family, is what I have personally heard being said.
Yes. And also interesting because the Dhanammal, all the musicians that you played so far were directly or indirectly influenced or inspired by the Dhanammal tradition.
Influenced.
So yes. So we are going to now listen.
Now hearing from the actual family members.
Yes, 2 granddaughters. So let's listen to Vrindama's version first.
Yes.
So, this Nive Gati Rova Raga, it's so interesting to see so many different versions of that.
Yeah.
Right? Nive Gati Rova. Whereas if you hear Ariyakudi, Nive Gati, it's all these little variations are very interesting. The handling of the ma, plain சில பேர் பாடிருக்கா, கேவியன் பாடிருக்கார், அந்த காந்தாரத்தை தொட்டு இவா பாடுறா, இவா it's very interesting. But now we'll see how Balama has sung the same thing. It's very interesting.
So one thing I just before we play that one, KVN Mama ரொம்ப இன்ட்ரெஸ்டிங்கா ஒன்று பாடியிருக்கார். அந்த bro இப்படி ஒன்று பாடியிருக்கார். அப்படி I've never heard anybody.
Yes, he's the only one who sung that that phrase like that. Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting, very beautiful when it comes from him.
Very beautiful, yes. And just before I play Bala's clip, I think we also need to remember that she had very close friends from the Hindustani circle. She was hugely influenced by Hindustani music, and you can see it in her handling of so many ragams, including core Carnatic ragams like Purvi Kalyani and Shankarabharanam. If you listen to Bala Saraswati, you can see many more plain notes and lot of obvious influences from the north. So let's listen to her. Interesting to see how within the same family, within the same generation. And
that's the key word. Within the same generation. That's
within the same
key.
generation. That's the important point to note. How 2 cousins have sung the same song from the same source, so differently, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and even the charanam, with the mandapa mulanu, that line. Bantu Tanaiti, so many different அப்படின்னு பாடுறா, அப்படின்னு செம்மங்குடி பாடியிருக்கார். That's a very Kalyani-ish touch that Vrindama sings, and so does Ramnad Krishnan.
In fact, The one I've heard sometimes. Mandapa Muna Bantuta. அது வந்து மண்டப மூன அது ரெண்டாவது சங்கதியா பாடுவா.
ஆமா அதுதான். Ramnad sing that, by the way.
Even more Kalyani-ish, but
yes.
still.
அது செம்மங்குடி வந்து அப்படி பாடிருக்காரு. அந்த கா அப்படி பாடுறா இவா. It's so interesting how each one has. Now we have no way of knowing how Subbaraya Shasthri actually sang that. But it's interesting to note these differences. So how the aesthetic differs from person to person. You know. So all these are interesting points, and there is an intangible integrity.
Oh yeah.
Right? In each of these
I think it just shows. See, integrity is something that we should all uniformly have as music practitioners. But integrity notwithstanding, it just shows you how great that these musicians, each of them, were individually. Because the ability to process and the ability to bring out something that is still adherent to the source that they got it from, but still have the stamp of individuality and the stamp of individualistic brilliance. That I don't know. I don't know whether that's worthy of emulation or worthy of admiration or both. Or I don't know. You can never you can only strive for it. You don't know if you'll ever sound like that.
Yes, right. And although many of the things that they sang can be technically debated, using grammar, we never fail to see that there's so much Hameer Kalyani in whatever each of these musicians just sang, right?
Well, I think that's why they're so great, because the greatness, it transcends the grammar. But at the same time, even though the grammar as we know it is transcended, there doesn't seem to be any lack of integrity.
Yes. That is the fine line that these musicians managed very well, I feel.
Yeah.
So we have spoken at length on this subject, and we can go on forever, but I think we should put a halt and invite questions in now. Yes, Ram?
Yes, ready. Just want to stress again that, we won't be, I don't think we can really give answers, definitive answers, like you said at the beginning, but we can just try to provide some points that could be thought about or discussed.
Yes, for them to think about.
Yeah.
Sri Muthuswamy Dikshadhar composed 2 kritis in Hameer Kalyani on Sri Parimala Ranganatha, presiding deity of Thiruvingalur temple. Both kritis have same Pallavi line, Parimala Ranganatha. I would like to know how Dikshadhar handled Hameer Kalyani differently in both these kritis, the structure of both the kritis, as well as the aesthetic beauty of raga as composed by Dikshadhar in these kritis.
That's an interesting question, and again, very vast. But Ram, would you like to give us a short demonstration?
I think this is very interesting because the very fact that we have with us two kritis today, beginning with Parimala Ranganatham,
the same words,
Bhajeham, the same words. You can actually see how the raga has kind of progressed, because these two kritis, the versions that let's see how these two kritis represent the raga by the same composer is actually quite different. So let me just briefly sing both. I would also like to say that they are not two versions, but they are actually two separate kritis.
Yes.
Which have the same exact words for the Pallavi. Yes. So we usually differentiate by saying small Parimala Ranganatham and big Parimala Ranganatham. Yes. Small one has only Pallavi and Anupallavi. Big one has Pallavi, Anupallavi and Charanam.
Yes.
And for both, the Anupallavi and Charanam are completely different.
Yes.
Only the Pallavi is also, to me, it's quite different in its music, but just the words are exactly the same.
Yes.
So here goes. And here's the small one first. Parimala Ranganatham भजेऽहं वीरनुतं परिपालित भक्तं नाथं parimala. So that's the first one. That's the smaller one. The bigger kriti, this is the way I have learned it. Parimala ranganatham bhajeham परिमलरङ्गनाथं भजेऽहं वीरनुतं परिपालित भक्तं पुण्डरीकवल्लीनाथं परिमलरङ्गनाथं. And so this is the way I have learned
So
both.
interesting, because we see that the Hameer Kalyani in the second, the longer song, is more like the Hameer Kalyani we are used to today.
Yes,
as
exactly.
compared to the one in the shorter song, which is more Kalyani-ish, if I can say.
Exactly. So,
and the vastly different ways in which the Shuddha Madhyamam has been used in both the compositions, right?
Yes. So we can totally see as you said, the different dimensions of the raga. And the interesting thing is the documentation we have, the smaller kriti is, the notation for that is from Subbaraya Dikshita.
Yes.
In the early part of the 19th century, or even latter part of the 19th century. Latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century. My mistake.
Yes.
Yeah. And the documentation we have for the bigger kriti is much later, from the Kalde Kuchi Sishya Parampara of Swami
So
Dikshita.
again, we don't know what interpretation seeped in or what changes happened in transmission. We don't know. But
clearly something happened.
Yes, clearly something happened.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's with that. Shall we move to the next question?
Yes, yeah.
When you learn a new raga, or when you're exploring a raga, would you want to learn all the details about its past, about the history of the raga, how it started, what kind of evolution it underwent to reach its current form? Or sometimes when you do so, knowing all those little details about the past and all the different swarams that were there initially, would that confuse you? And so would you prefer to just learn the raga as it is in its current form, so you will be able to execute it well? For example, when I was reading about the raga Kapi, I read that in its original form, as an old raga, it was quite different, and it was an Upanga raga. But then later, as it evolved, it took influences from Hindustani music and acquired some Bhashanga swaras as it is sung currently. So knowing those details, will that confuse you? And so you would rather prefer to learn it in its current form and sing it thus? Which one would you prefer? Thank you.
Aka, do you want to?
I think that there is no rule book that says anything towards this, but I personally find it very enriching to know the origins and the evolution of the ragam to the extent that I can. Of course, all of us, practically speaking, just learn the composition or just hear versions that are there in recent memory and sing it, and that's how much we can do. But it does help sometimes, and I personally find it very interesting. And I think it gives me a holistic understanding of what it was and what it has become presently. And I don't think there's any room for confusion, most of the times at least, because I feel I can do justice to the ragam as it is today in keeping with what I am taught. Right? And what may be in the memory of people who've heard it in the recent past. So any other way of singing it from a time in history that we don't have access to can be a technical exercise, interesting to a few people and maybe to scholars, but to the majority of the audience and to a lot of the artists themselves, the raga that we know as is today is what is practical and relevant and really enjoyable, right?
Right. So this is a question of academic versus practicality.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
So I would say that at least in my experience, my interest in looking at the academic aspects of raga and raga history actually came quite recently. Before that, my whole exposure of ragas was only what I learned from my gurus in terms of compositions, and of course, what I heard by other great musicians. And like you said rightly, that is more than enough to satisfactorily present a raga and have it, be deemed widely acceptable by the listening public, right?
Yes.
But obviously, when we go into something in its academic history and stuff, it enhances our understanding of what we are actually singing. But how much is practically transferable from the notebook to what we actually sing is debatable.
That's the other thing, because there's no way of perfectly notating Carnatic music, one.
Yeah.
And secondly, we don't even have documented versions of many of the compositions.
Many, yeah.
So all these things, yes, absolutely. Yes. So shall we go to the next question?
Yes.
So my question to you is, keeping in mind that change is the only constant and changes happen only when some intent is put to it. Is it the performers or the audiences who show such an intent, or is it just the combined thoughts of both that creates the pivot?
Interesting. Ram?
See, I think how I would answer this is probably with like a classic example of a certain composition. Let's take Nagumomo, right? Nagumomo, as we know, I mean, most students and artists who learn the song are told that the original version is quite different than what we are actually singing today.
Yes.
Right, with Shuddha Devatam instead of...
The Devatam itself being a different one, yes.
Yeah, even if you, I mean, from whatever limited stuff I've seen, even the raga or the raga's ascent and descent, the Arohana Avarohanam seems to be quite different than what we actually sing today.
Yes.
But what I have heard generally is that Musri Subramania Iyer is credited, or at least he's known to have made the composition popular through his record back in the early part of the 20th century, in I think 1930s or 40s. Now, after he sang it, it became so popular that it feels like the audience, whatever came before Musri Ayerwal didn't really register with them as much as what he sang did. So after his time, anytime that composition even mentioned, that version of the composition is the one that is remembered, and therefore expected from other performers who came after him and of the same time period.
Yes.
Even Semmangudi Srinivasa Iyer, who's like, I guess, little junior to Musri Ayerwal, but considered, pretty much, same time period roughly. Sang it this way, the so-called popular version, what became the popular version. Now, obviously, if it is indeed true that Musri Ayerwal was the first one who sang it this way, then we don't know what spurred the change. It was just his artistic discretion that determined this change, not from the audience.
Yes.
But because what he sang was so beautiful, it caught on with the audience, and that became to be expected from other musicians. Now, if somebody random goes and sings Nagumomu, the way it was before, in any other way, it will be like, what is this? We won't really know. In fact, even as artists, we'll be like, it's kind of strange, because our ears have also now been so tuned to what he sang and popularized.
Yes, and I think we have to remember that even now when we sing any artist sings any composition, audiences are listening to the versions that they heard of that same song earlier, and they are actually listening to that in their
They're
minds.
Subconsciously comparing that with whatever they've heard before.
Yes, so true, yes. And that's the thing. The thing is that we can never know the intent behind change, right?
Right. But I would also say that
change itself.
But I would also say that the impetus or intent to change only comes from an artist.
Yes,
it doesn't come directly from the audience, right? The artist என்ன சொல்றது, he or she makes the audience, he or she exposes the audience to something that regularly that becomes accepted.
Yes.
So the initial impetus is from our side only.
So many reasons why the change, even a musician could sing or interpret in a certain way, right? It could be what they have learned. It could be somebody else's influence. It could be their own way of singing, their capacity or ability to sing that particular phrase or composition in that way. There's so many reasons which we'll never know. Like you said, what really stays on is how beautifully that composition
so when we realize that, exactly. So when we realize that how something has the potential to make such a huge impact on the listening public, to the extent that they become unmindful of what has even existed before that, it is doubly important for us to be responsible about what we do.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So
and on that very important note, let's have the next question.
Yes.
The topic of aesthetics in Carnatic music seems to be such a highly subjective and an almost elusive one. My question to you two is, are there any absolutes? What are those things in aesthetics which are too sacred to be left to subjective interpretation?
For myself, as far as what I've learned from my gurus is concerned, the compositions of the Trinity are the absolutes. And what we hear from the masters of generations before us are absolutes. So anything we do has to be based on that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like I think I mentioned this earlier, there have been quite a few musicians who have done something that is completely different than what has been heard in the past. Classic example is Dr. M. Krishna. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't make him any lesser or make him wrong for doing something. No, I mean, what he produced and what he did is sheer genius, and it's unimaginably beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. But
body of work. Yes.
If you were to ask me, that is what I consider absolute. With a few exceptions like geniuses such as him. That's what I would say. I guess that's the best way I could answer that. What do you think, Akka?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the absolutes that we are talking about and can only talk about is the Padantarams that we learn, our compositions, the source from which we learn, not tampering with that as far as possible. And yes, I think those are the points of sacredness, if you ask me, because everything else is open to interpretation, and there's no limit to which people can change for the sake of changing. But I think change, because something is beautiful, is different than change just for the sake of changing something.
Yeah. So, Akka, I thought that maybe we could sing the Pallavi of Venkata Shaila Vihara together.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. Venkata Shaila Vihara Shaila Vihara